Hello, my name is Fraser Simons. This is my channel Springboard Thought. Today I'm going to be attempting to speak about With Some Intelligence, Beautiful World, Where Are You? By Sally Rooney, the new book. This came out, I think, on September 7th for most of the world, but in Canada it was listed as coming out on the 16th. So I'm actually early. I'm taping this on the 15th. I got it on the 14th, but the rest of the world, I think, got it on the 17th anyway, so I'm quite behind on everybody else's timeline anyway. But what I'd like to do with this book, since all the reviews are out for it anyway, and some people have already spoken about this very thoughtfully, I wanted to read this book critically and with a mind of really trying to sort of dissect what it is about her craft work that really works for me. Be it the way she constructs narrative, her actual physical sentence, paragraph structures and stuff like that. I think she does a lot of interesting things stylistically that pull you into the character's headspace while still keeping you at arm's length with the point of view. But so hopefully my idea is that if you haven't read a Sally Rooney book, then maybe I can entice you or put you off of it by specifically trying to articulate what actually works for me and why these books are so powerful and resonant for me. To get it out of the way, if you want to know just the review score, I gave it 5 out of 5. I loved it. This book follows 4 characters: Alice, Eileen, Simon, and Felix. It mostly hinges upon Alice, I would say, or at least the impetus of the book, and the crux of the main tension comes from Alice. Alice has made a career of writing novels. She's a novelist. She's a working author. She has issues stemming from her past in which she didn't have any friends. She wasn't particularly sociable. She was introverted, and she has her 2 close friends, which I will get to as later because they are characters, but she is thrust into the spotlight and limelight. She's giving accolades and praise, and as she sees it, she doesn't feel like she deserves the success and other people's labor, other people's work, especially as it goes into like Marxism, capitalism, just the overall anxiety of people at her age at 29, millennials, have about the climate crisis and the political stuff happening. All of this tension kind of culminates into what we can surmise as like a psychotic episode that she was sent to. She self-checks into a hospital for mental health issues, and then as she is treated, she moves to a small town and doesn't have contact with anybody except for Felix. Felix is somebody who seems like he's a little bit of a fuckboy at first, but is just more different in his deployment of self-defense mechanisms. He doesn't particularly care about carrying the weight of a whole bunch of people's anxiety. He's more concerned with his own poverty situation. He basically treats people and his life as a game, as I can see it, which makes it very binary for him. He's either winning or he's losing. He's also fairly closed off, so telling you more about his personality is a little bit of a spoiler, but essentially the Alice and Felix meet on Tinder, and what ensues is like a strange uncoiling of a relationship. The relationship that forms is very interesting and maybe a little bit off kilter, but very suited to their personalities. Felix, we never really learn too much about. He is always sort of a peripheral element of Alice's chapters, and the chapters alternate between Alice talking about what is happening, and usually it enters a very specific situational dynamics between Felix and Alice herself. Sally Rooney has talked a lot about her writing style, and she says that she constructs scenes and books and narration and plot in terms of duos. So she looks at an interaction that she thinks would be really interesting to characterize, explore, and see where it goes, and then she writes that. Each chapter is pretty specific to an interaction between two or more characters, and there's nuances being portrayed in that. We get very little interiority most of the time, but it actually really depends on the situation. There's no really fixed point of view for the book. The narrator seems as quizzical and curious about the events that are taking place as the reader would be. When people make specific motions or if they say specific things, the narrator is trying to be very faithful to what is empirically and practically happening in the situation. And usually it is addressing the tone and the going into pretty granular specificity for what each character is trying to get across when they say it. But we can see, because we are curious about the characters and because we're not omniscient, we can't be in their heads, we're getting the impression that each person is talking past each other or not quite connecting or making the point, or the other person has misconstrued what they're saying. And so it sort of plays out kind of like a slow motion car crash sometimes, if it's like an argument or a fight or some sort of conflict. But other times it doesn't have to be a very specific conflict, it just has to be an interesting interaction. And Sally Rooney is very good at characterizing people from their very specific mannerisms that they will do when they're nervous, or we see almost every facet of an interaction except for what is happening in the person's head. It kind of signals to us all these nuances in body language that are very important and make a lot more sense as the book goes on, as we talk about Eileen, who is Alice's best friend. The first part of the book, these people are completely siloed basically until they come together, and the actual paragraphs structure reflect that. In the beginning of the book, it's very quick reading. The paragraphs are broken up as you might expect. However, with Sally Rooney, just as in the past, there's no quotation marks, and the structures of each sentence sometimes are what you would call, I guess, run-on sentences and stuff, but it's more like she's trying to write in dialect without having dialect in it. So you can tell that these people have accents and they have specific inflections and stuff happening. They sometimes drop words specifically, sometimes they add words, and sometimes their words become breathless or short, and it's all very conversational and done, I think, really well into a T. You really get a sense of every person's voice in particular, and it's almost like impossible to read their voices without inserting like an Irish lilt to them, especially for specific characters. It's just sort of masterful dialect work, and as far as I'm concerned, there's no cognitive load on the reader to try to like chew through these sentences and input it into your voice and then sort of filter through. It's very rapid reading and very interesting and eminently consumable. But Eileen is sort of similar in situation to Felix in that she works for a essentially nonprofit. It's funded from the government magazine, literary magazine, in which she is the editor, and they're barely making ends meet, and she's barely making ends meet as well. All of their money comes from like the taxpayers and stuff like that, and she has to live with flatmates. She's 29. She sort of, feels like she's struggling at that age because she hasn't accomplished much, and then Alice, in contrast, has accomplished so much. And their friendship is at a tension point, as with all of the characters when we meet them, are at a tension point. And Eileen and Alice start a correspondence, which is what alternates each chapter. And it's very interesting because usually these sort of chapters are formatted like a letter, but they're not. In this one, it is just as if they're speaking to each other, except that it does signal to the reader that the like walls of text, the chunkier, meatier portions of the book are coming. And to me, what it means is when Sally Rooney puts these chapters together, or these scenes together, in which people are mashed together in their interactions in one block of text. It's just the sort of space that they're inhabiting cognitively. If they're on the same page, literally, as one another in an interaction, then you just read it as one go. There's obviously grammar and stops and whatnot, but the formatting sort of tells you how close the characters are, not in physical proximity, but emotionally and sort of clicking with each other. And so one scene might have them speaking very closely to one another, and it will just be like blocks of text for 3 or 4 pages or something. But when those characters go to a party, it's broken up, because not only are they apart physically, they're not sharing the same sort of personal space. The same interaction isn't happening. There's so many people there that it's broken up normally, and I think that's really interesting. And I should say also that when I say the blocks of text, or the walls of text, as some people say, they still read quite quickly, unimpeded, still quite conversational. It still takes longer to get through those sections, of course, because the breaks aren't rapidly going through less actual words than a wall of text would. But at least in your brain, you sort of know unconsciously, or if you're me, paying attention and tabbing things and trying to figure out how she's formatting it, the reader knows how close these people are. And when they are, actually communicating to one another specifically and having a one-on-one personal interaction, and more than 2 people can inhabit a wall of text type situation as well. It's just a purely an interactional thing as far as I can tell. So Eileen and Simon and Alice form a sort of trio in which Alice has, upended and left their symbiotic relationship, basically, where the 3 best friends sort of operated. And we get the sense that everything has been really discombobulated by that. Alice is not really herself when she's apart from them, but she is still deploying self-defense mechanisms that make it so that she is hiding from these friends, basically, and trying to come to grips with things, but also hide from things in a way after she is discharged from the hospital and moves there immediately for a holiday, and then meets Felix and whatnot. Simon and Eileen are a little bit more complicated. Both, we get the sense that they've grown up with each other, I think, since 15 years old. There's some chapters where it digresses specifically right into their past, and it's just that, which I actually quite liked. But it's only after you see them in specific interactions that occurs. And so you kind of see how they are with each other now, and then how they are with each other in the past. And just like everything else that's being narrated, we're being kept in a curious sort of distance, where the things that the narrator notices are the things that sort of signal to us the miscommunications that are happening with the letters between Alice and Eileen, because they can't have the body language to communicate those things. And it also has something to say, I think, about parasocial relationships, specifically with Alice. People feel like they know a specific person because they've seen their picture on a book and read their books and feel like they know them and whatnot. And so the only thing that capitalism really knows how to do is to commodify a product and to make it in terms of a asymmetrical relationship. So even as she is creating art and trying to pour some of herself into a space that is the novel, it ultimately is just a product of consumption, and the parasocial relationships begin and everything sort of tumbles down for her. whereas Eileen feels sort of like purposeless, and she clearly has some relationship with Simon since she was 15, and Simon is sort of, I wouldn't say like in stark contrast to everybody, but Simon is like a very tall, very sweet Catholic boy who, just like everybody else in the book, has some very large barriers to entry, even with his friends. His self-defense mechanisms feel very Catholic to me, having grown up in a Catholic household. You're not supposed to really speak about bad things that happen and really like talk through your issues. It's just sort of like something that you maybe don't even acknowledge. You just deal with and get through and don't speak to anybody about, and then move on. And so he's sort of internalized that, and as a result, every time Simon and Eileen try to interact, they reach like a sort of almost standstill where both have their hackles up, but they don't know why. Eileen, for her part, is trying to specifically connect with Simon, but doesn't feel like she can, yet they both orbit each other closer than anybody in their lives, and they both don't want to leave each other's lives either. So their friendship hinges on more emotional intimacy than some of them can provide at certain points in their life, so they end up colliding with each other and then bouncing off each other and still in orbit, forming this strange sort of bond that they can't really make sense of but also can't do without. And so it's very interesting that Alice has disinserted herself from this, because I wondered very much what that dynamic looked like with all three of them. In the letters, we see the two women, Eileen and Alice, really trying to speak about things that they clearly haven't been able to speak about in person for a long time. But again, because there's not that dynamic of them being able to present their arguments in person, sometimes it isn't very fruitful in their conversation. But it always navigates to very interesting spaces where they're talking about sociological issues and political issues and feminist issues, and just sort of like them trying to make sense of their lives and their interactions with both Felix and Simon. And eventually, as these people do move together throughout the book, as I said, their paragraphs start to get longer and combined into the interactions, which I quite liked a lot. It felt like a lot of setup that moved very quickly, and then you got to like the very meaty, chunky aspects of these personalities interacting. And it's really hard to talk about how well Sally Rooney characterizes people and how well she captures very specific moments, because she flits in and out of environmental things that reflect on the characters, as well as, like, as I said, mannerisms, but specific deployments of diction between the characters that make sense for them, but are also far probably more earnest and like urgent than they would usually appear in real life. So you get a sense that the conversation is still quite realistic in what would be said in real life, but that it's still as economical and interesting as dialogue is. I feel like this is a product of her having written a script for normal people. It does feel quite a lot like really good script work in some places, especially in the latter half, where it's always show don't tell. I would say there's not a lot more, but there's more interiority happening in the first part of the book. And that's when you really need to characterize them and kind of understand what they are. But the best thing that Sally Rooney does is illustrate just how much and how difficult it is to get to know somebody, even when you're really trying. She captures the moments in which people are miscommunicating and not realizing it, or communicating really effectively, and it becomes really endearing and affecting and just interesting. And she gives all of her prose so much weight in these specific interactions. There's no other sense of like conflict and drama. It's just these interactions that are happening, these collisions between these characters, and it's riveting. And I think it's very cool that we're not getting the sense of like artificial pacing or artificial conflict that sort of contemporary novels try to incorporate to keep an audience engaged. Instead, she really shows you how, even without interiority, even if you were just standing in a corner watching these specific people, you would be drowned in the moments that they're being characterized in the book as well. Because that's kind of what it feels like, a fly on the wall that's noticing these people move their hair and touch each other on the arm or smile at each other or look at one another when the other isn't looking at each other, stuff like that. There's a sense of everydayness about it, and how if she can paint very specific moments like this so beautifully that every interaction that you have with the people that you know in person has a sense like that. And I believe that about people, that you always meet people, and when they always say that their lives are boring and nothing really happens to them. But if you really get to know a person and they actually try to communicate, even if they fail in doing so, it becomes these moments that your character and your life are built upon, and those are the ones that you actually tend to remember and construct your being around. And so it just feels like very humane and interesting stories, and I really like how she marries her prose work, craft work, and sentence work to paragraph work in the sense of building to a closeness. And so you get the impression that these people are so far apart in the beginning, and then as you read, they slowly come together, literally in the actual paragraphs of the sentences, until it culminates into a central tension, more or less being alleviated, but also you knowing so much more about the characters that normal people didn't do. Normal People was very successful at moving through these moments of time in these people's lives, of how those two specific people came together, collided, and came apart. But you didn't really get a sense of, like, I would say, their childhood or this degree of specificity in the inner machinations of their lives, because you're always held at a little bit of a distance. Whereas in this, there are some chapters, especially when there is a memory trigger to stuff like that, when for instance, Eileen and Simon go to a wedding and they both look at each other, segues into a memory that lasts like 6 pages or something like that, of them as kids, and it just constructs so much more around a previous interaction that they've had that still made sense and was still very interesting, but builds upon it in such interesting ways that I had to like stop and actually think about it and like just process everything and put it down, basically. There's some very poignant moments that are constructed like that, where you get just enough information to not feel like you're being bombarded, but then it's recontextualized and recontextualized. It often segues into cultural consciousness or general intellect about some specific issues, or even how we consume what is our daily lives on our timelines and social media, and what that sort of does for the larger conversation now. And so I think it's just a really masterful work that has improved upon her 2 other works greatly. Anyway, I've rambled about this enough. I think you get my enthusiasm for the book. Let me know what you thought about the book or her other books, what worked for you, what didn't work for you, and I will speak to you later.